Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us for the second episode of our peer learning web series. And this one is being presented by the Belize Fund for a Sustainable Future. So for those who are new to proceedings, my name is Jabal, and I will be your moderator for this session. I work for the Global Island Partnership, or GLISPA, which serves as the Secretariat for the Island Trust Alliance. And what is the Island Trust Alliance? This is a community of practice for conservation trust funds working across all SIDS regions. So we have member funds from the Pacific, Caribbean, and the ACE region, and it is a space for CTFs, for conservation trust funds, to not just advocate together with a unified voice on the global stage, but also to do or do joint outreach to donors and so on in a coordinated fashion. But just as importantly, it is a space for our members to learn from one another about how to do their work better. And this initiative is part of that effort. In consultation with our members, we designed and kicked off this webinar series as part of this peer exchange. So keep that in mind when these sessions are intentionally designed as peer learning spaces rather than public-facing presentations or polished showcases. The goal isn't to present perfect case studies, it is to have honest, practical conversations about what is working, what's challenging, and what others might adapt in their own context. So we really want to encourage participation. After the Belize Fund presents, a big chunk of the hour is reserved for questions and discussions because we believe it's that exchange between peers that the real value would emerge. This session is going to be recorded for the benefit of our members who are unable to join. And post-webinar, we will figure out with our membership the best way to package out and disseminate the learning outcomes of each session in a way that they can best utilize within their own organizational context. I said this in the previous episode, but if you're joining through a members network or interested in staying engaged beyond today, we'd love to hear from you. We are always on the lookout for other SIDS CTFs and institutions in SIDS that support SIDS CTFs to join and contribute actively to this community of practice across all of our activities, not just this webinar series. If you're here in a more individual capacity and not representing any institution or organization, still reach out to me. I'll put my email in the chat and we'll add you to our friends listing and include you in invitations for future open sessions like these. So that was a general gist. Now on to today's session. Today's episode is called What It Takes to Make Innovative Finance Work, Practical Lessons from the Belize Fund. And as the name suggests, we'll be drawing on Belize's experience with sovereign debt swaps, blue bond commitments, and examine how innovative finance is operationalized through grant making to reach communities and priority ecosystems. Emphasis will be placed on lessons learned around institutional design, accessibility, capacity gaps, and inclusivity. We're very grateful to our colleagues from the Belize Fund for leading this discussion, and the Executive Director, Dr. Leandra Cho Ricketts, and Program Manager, Josue Oliver, will be taking us through their presentation. After the presentation wraps up, we'll open up the floor for a more interactive discussion. So please keep your questions and experiences in mind as we go, or better yet, feel free to post questions in the chat as they come to you during the presentation, and then we'll address them to the speakers afterwards. That's it from me for now. I'm delighted to hand it over to Leandra to take us through the presentation. Leandra?
All right, thank you very much, Jabal. And I'd like to thank Jabal and Paula from the Global Island Partnership for inviting Belize Fund to be the second to share our experiences with you guys through the peer learning series. So good morning, or good day, I should say. Good day, everyone. It's morning for us, but it might be evening for some of you all across the Pacific. We are excited to share a little bit about the work that we've been doing at the Belize Fund, and more importantly, I guess, who the fund is and how we came about. So we're taking the perspective of exploring innovative financing models, and this one is looking at nature bonds. It's a nature bonds case study. So that's the terminology that's been coined by IDB, TNC, for the series of debt swaps that have been happening that has a real nature bond focus. So I'll just run over a quick overview of the Belize Fund, and then move into diving a little deeper into the innovative financing for people and nature, which is going to give you a better insight into the actual debt swap itself. And then talk about how we create impact through our grant making and our approaches, what we've been learning over the time that we've been in existence. Next slide. So the Belize Fund is a CTF. As you know, this is a a platform for CTFs. We're a private conservation trust fund. We were established in March 2022, and we were established specifically coming out of this nature bond, or as we call it, the Belize Blue Bonds. And that swap was finalized in 2021. And shortly after, in March 2022, the fund was incorporated as a private CTF. And the purpose of the fund is to be a sustainable financing mechanism that's channeling, managing the funds coming from the Belize Blue Bonds, and to ensure that this is happening in a transparent manner, and that we have the structure and framework for perpetual financing. And the big focus, because it's a blue bonds, is for marine conservation and sustainable ocean use. So the key elements that the funding supports relates to biodiversity, conservation, improving or maintaining the health of ecosystems, and supporting community well-being. Because for Belize, it's blue space, it's ocean space is an integral part of the country's economy and lifeblood. I mean, we are a SIDS entity. And the design of the blue bonds incorporated strategies to ensure that this funding would support the government in meeting its national commitments and global targets related to, like, the global biodiversity framework, the sustainable development goals, and the UN CCC. Next. So since 2022, when we became operational, we've been working real hard in trying to mobilize and get this funding flowing, because there's a certain time period across which the funding is flowing. It's a 20-year period, and it is to deliver on specific milestones that are time bound, which we'll get into a little more. So over that time, I think over 4 years, it's almost 4 years now, we have approved over 13 million in grants, dispersed 10 million of that. And it's fairly evenly split between grants that we make to non-government groups. So we've invested so far 6.4 million, and then 7.1 million to the government. And this support to government is to ensure that establishing or expanding our marine protected areas, getting in place our spatial plan, having effective patrols and protection of our blue space can happen with dedicated support. So overall, this funding has supported 614,424 hectares that we have under protection across Belize's marine protected area network. It has engaged 48 of our coastal communities across the country. And we have a total of 14 marine protected areas that the funding has supported through about 30 projects. And just to give you a little bit more context in terms of Belize and the size. So we're a fairly small country, a little over 417,000 in terms of population. Our total territory is about 46,000 kilometers square, and 23,654 of that is our marine territory. So we have a little more that we in our marine territory than we do have on land. So it is a fairly large area for a small country with limited resources. Next, nevertheless, again, because of the design of the nature bonds, the blue bonds, and the approach in delivering time-bound results, we have made significant strides in advancing our protection of our marine territory, or ocean space as we call it. And we have increased protection since the signing of the blue bonds from 11% to 25.4%. And we are on target to achieve next year the 30% that was set and defined under this agreement. So what does this look like on the ground? It's providing jobs through the protected area staff that we support. It's a lot of capacity building and training, not just for protected area managers, but for communities. ensuring that our water protected areas and our territories effectively patrolled. There's a lot of support we do give to climate resilience and in the area of coral restoration. We have supported a partner, Fragments of Hope, in expanding restoration efforts across the country. Science is a key part of what we support, so ensuring that we have data being collected to inform the management of our marine protected areas. And then we also invest in the communities, support to fishers through training, through capacity building, to up and coming blue economy, blue businesses, as we call them, for like women-led seagrass business, sorry, seaweed businesses, and providing tailored community grant support for community groups, which we'll expand on a little later. And then on the government side, ensuring that these marine protected areas are being effectively patrolled, that we're working on expanding the areas with science-based approaches. And across the country, we've had over 4,000 persons engaged through our marine spatial planning process. Next. So I wanted to then, so that's talking at giving an overview of where we've been in the 4 years since being established. But let's go back to get a little history of how we got here now. And this is the sovereign debt swap. So 2021, the Belize Blue Bonds for Ocean Conservation, that's the name of the whole legal document that was negotiated, was signed between the Nature Conservancy and the government of Belize. And this was all to help Belize repurchase 100% of its USD 553 million super bonds. So this was a mega debt hanging over the country. And the position of the country at that time, it was all our external debt and a quarter of our total debt. And the country was really not in a very good position to be able to pay on it. As I gather, the bondholders were concerned that we would not be able to pay, that we'd be running into default. So it was an opportune time to discuss and consider debt relief. And I think, everything lining up as it was with global economic slowdowns and the COVID pandemic, because Belize, like all SIDS and Caribbean countries, was really hit hard. Our economy was hit hard. I think that opened up the way for the government to be really amenable to this. And so it was purchased, that debt super bond was purchased at a 45% discount. And a TNC subsidiary provided the loan for this repurchase. It was guaranteed, I think, political risk insurance by USDFC. So they're another important partner in this deal. And then Credit Suisse was the bank that financed the actual blue bonds for TNC to make that loan. And it took a few years. This was a few years in the making, as far as I'm aware. I think it probably started a little earlier with the previous government, but it came to fruition under the current government that we have. And at the end of that negotiation process, Belize committed to, in return for this buying over the debt, committed to achieving certain key marine conservation targets and allocating funding over the next 20 years. So this really is a big selling point, that for the debt payoff, the country will be benefiting through certain key targets and dedicated funding over the next 20 years. So if you can go back, sorry. So the Belize Fund was a CTF created specifically to manage the financing coming out of this, because then the government, as a part of this agreement, had to be making conservation payments. It was quarterly to the TNC subsidiary, and that TNC subsidiary is our main donor. They're the ones that channels the funds to the Belize Fund. So the fund was created through a national process that consulted key stakeholder groups in the design of our board. So the governing body was selected through a consultative process led by TNC to create an independent board. It also, that process also engaged stakeholders nationally to select the name of the fund, and it also engaged them in identifying thematic areas or on the grant making framework in the sense of the scope and nature of grants and funding that would be coming out. So that part of well, it's not the blue bonds, that part of the creation of the CTF was consultative and it did engage stakeholders. However, the development of the conservation commitments under the blue bonds did not have that same level of stakeholder engagement, and we will touch on that later, why that was a challenge or has been a challenge. So coming out of the conservation funding agreement signed between the government and TNC over 20 years, it's mobilizing 180 million US from the finance savings. And these are going to be funding key marine conservation targets. Next. So I've been speaking about these milestones and commitments that were made, and I will just share, with you what these 8 milestones are. So these are legally binding contractual commitments that the government has to deliver on by the times that it's set out in the agreement, or they will breach various aspects of the agreement there. So we have accomplished 5 milestones so far. The country has met milestones 1 through 5. And in this year, 2026, we expect to hit milestone 6, which is expanding our biodiversity protection zones to 30% of the ocean space, and getting our marine spatial plan signed into law and implemented. The final milestone 8, I think is expected to be achieved by 2029. So we're looking over a time period from the signing of the agreement, over a 9-year time period that the country, via the government and its partners, need to deliver on these milestones. And I think I'm passing over now to Josue, our program manager. Oh, sorry, I have one more slide, and then I'll pass over to Josue. So what does this financing look like that was unlocked? So we have 2 sources of funding coming out of the blue bonds: sinking funds of 80 million US total over 20 years. So this ends in 2041. And we receive this at approximately 4 million annually, of which 3.2 million goes into our grant making. And then there's an endowment fund that was established by the government. So they had to pay in 23.5 million US to set up an endowment. And it's expected or projected that this would grow to 90 million in 2041. And in 2041, that will be transferred to the Belize Fund. So this is currently managed externally by TNC, but in 2041, it is expected to be transferred to the Belize Fund. And the proceeds from that would continue to maintain the flow of funds, which is still approximately 4 million US in perpetuity. And so the fund has been working on establishing capacities for investment management, and seeing how we can leverage the funding that we currently have to scale up impact through other initiatives happening in the country, things like the PFP that's being planned. We are a big partner in that, in leveraging the funding we have from the blue bonds towards the PFP. And now I'll pass over to Josue.
Thank you, Dr. Ricketts, and good day to everybody. So Dr. Ricketts mentioned something very key there, which was the involvement of our stakeholders in the development of the fund. And one of the main aspects that came out of that was the thematic areas. We know that although the government is lead in those milestones, it cannot be achieved only by them. It has to come with support from non-government partners, and this is very important. Can you go back to the previous slide, please? The previous slide. Previous slide is there. So in that stakeholder engagement workshop, the government had its specific milestones to achieve, and we needed to provide a way to ensure that our non-government partners were also able to contribute toward achieving these milestones. So these thematic areas were developed. This would allow non-government partners to also be able to access funding and be able to provide some support. And the thematic areas, as you're seeing on the screen, is protection for biodiversity, looking at how to prevent depletion or loss of our biodiversity, looking at sustainable fisheries, how we manage and ensure that we have healthy stocks, climate resilience. These are types of projects that look at how well resilient our coastal and marine ecosystems are to the changes in climate. And then finally, blue business too. So these four thematic areas, all projects that we fund have to be aligned to one of these. And as you can notice, these are broad thematic areas. I like the fact that it is inclusive because it is not only NGOs, but it also includes our profit making, which is our MSMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises as well. So next slide, please. So as this framework for the grants was being developed, the government had a strategic allocation, which allowed them to access funding to be able to meet those 8 milestones that were shared previously. And of that, the funding that we're getting is directly allocated. Roughly about 40% of the funding is allocated to the government, and which comes up to about 1.6 million annually to apply for funding. The way they do it is they do it through a multi-year proposal up to 3 years, and it's implemented through one unit. So instead of the fund getting proposals from different units, departments, ministries, there is one unit within the government that works as a coordinating entity to put this together. They receive all the proposals and the concepts, present one proposal to the fund, and then the fund reviews it, ensures alignment with the conservation commitments, ensure alignment with what the government needs to meet. And then based on that, the grant is rolled out. On the other hand, the other program that was developed was the Grants Awards program. This is the program that provides funding to non-government entities and allows them to actually access funding as well and support the milestones of or the achievements of these milestones. They are still under the 4 thematic areas, and also it's 40% annually, roughly about 1.6 million. In the agreement, it speaks about competitive grants, and to allow it's a small team here in the Belize Fund, so we use a 2-step process where we allow our partners to submit a concept, providing us sufficient time to review their ideas and provide guidance is it something that we can fund. Based on that, then a full proposal is developed. It passes through screening, a technical review committee, and then it goes to the board for review and approval. So there are 2 types of windows that we have right now under that, which is the regular grants, provides funding for small, medium, and large grants, as you can see on the screen, and community grants, which are grants up to 50,000 to specifically emerging entities within our coastal and marine areas. Since if we're only doing competitive grants, one of the main challenges is actually creating impact. The way competitive grants work is as much as you try to provide the type of projects or initiatives that you want, it's dependent on what you get. So it's basically the fund develop the strategic partnerships, which allows the fund to actually target specific areas, target specific thematic areas that we would want to support. and identify its partners to ensure that we can actually deliver on impact as well. And since Belize is not seen from natural disasters, we have an emergency response grant which allows us to mobilize resources and provide immediate support to our partners, especially in dire need. Next slide, please. So who can apply? Under the regular grants or under our grants awards program, academia can apply, local communities, MSMEs, NGOs, but also other partners that align with our mission and our visions. Our other partners would be like cooperative associations, as well youth groups, indigenous groups as well, right? For the government strategic allocation is only one partner that can apply directly to the fund. That's the partner that compiles and puts all the concepts that the government provides and develop one proposal. That unit is the Blue Bonds Finance Permanence Unit, which was strategically placed under the Prime Minister's office, the Office of the Prime Minister, to ensure that there's a high level of interest and shows the government's commitment towards this. Next slide, please. So, as Dr. Leandro said, we're roughly about 4 years young, and or baby, if you want to call it, but we have had our share of lessons learned. And as you can see from there is gaps within our communities as to the accessing of funding. Another one that came up a lot was that large NGOs have a good advantage to access the funding as they are well established. They understand the requirements. They have proper policies, manuals in place, while community or local community groups do not. We also learned that it is important to have a forecast for funding our marine protected areas. So we listen. We do our stakeholder engagements, we do our outreach, and we listen. And one of the key things that came out of that listening was that we must be able to adapt, we must be able to be flexible, and we must be able to be fit for purpose. So we developed this tailored approach for funding, and that's how the community grants came into play. It's very key that it allows entities that do not have all the requirements as an established NGO to still be able to access funding because as you can see, they're also users. They also benefit of the resources that are there. So we need to take them into consideration. Another key lesson was that using blended finance to unlock more direct access to fishers is key. Most of our fishers depend on these are seasonal, so they would go for a loan, for example, right? And then they would go to the sea, bring in their income, and then they pay their loan. Having blended finance allows them the opportunity to have access to grant resources and be able to actually maybe change the way they do culturally, how they fish, using sustainable methods. And another lesson learned was that if we want to engage these local communities, we can't expect them to be writing technical proposals or proposals that use jargons from the CTFs. So providing them with proposal writing support, financial management support, and mentoring throughout the project was very key. And just recently, we had our learning and knowledge sharing workshop last week, and that was very well noted, and our partners voiced that of the importance of having that support. And finally, another lesson learned is that although all of these are happening and the competitive grants work, it's like us just trying to have a bucket and waiting for water to drop if we're using a competitive approach, right? So having strategic partnerships allows the fund to be able to target specific impact, target specific organizations and people to reach out to more and be able to provide meaningful change as we try to implement national level changes, national level impact. So those are our lessons learned, and I believe that's the end of the slides. Yes, so with that, I end the presentation, and if there are any additional information, you can contact us there, and I think now I can pass it over to the moderators.
Thank you, Jose. Yes, that's really good presentation. Thank you both. We're now into the Q&A part of our session. I see there's already questions in the chat, but before we get to that, I just want to make sure everybody's up and awake, and I just want to get a sort of instant feel in terms of what stood out most to you from that presentation. So in the chat, one word, what part of this Belize model feels most relevant to you? And that might help me in terms of how we steer the discussion as well. So just tell me in one word what really stood out to you in terms of this presentation. And then we'll get to the questions in the chat. See, learning and adaptation, stakeholder engagement, yeah. I think Josue's whole thing on the grant making process was very interesting. While you all do that, I'm going to get to the questions in the chat. Avo had one which Leandra already answered, but I want to dig into it a bit deeper because he asked, what does the endowment fund invest into in its 4 million USD? Leandra didn't have the answers because it's managed by TNC. But for the other CTFs in the room, I think the deeper part of the question is, are the endowment funds tied to ESG regulations and those types of safeguards, and how strict do you think that should be ethically? Like, what do you think? Should it be just be about trying to maximize the kind of funds you get to help do the work you do, or is that really important as well? I just want to get a feel for how people are feeling, if anyone wants to speak on that a bit. What's the standard?
Well, and if I can just jump in though, so like I mentioned, we don't actually manage it. We know that it's TNC, and we do know that they have ESG standards that they're following for the investments to guide them there, because that is a key part of how they invest funding. And certainly the Belize Fund itself, while we are not actively managing any endowments, our investment policy does define and look at ESGs also to ensure that we would carefully be selecting any type of investment opportunities.
Thanks, Leandro. And the second question, well, Kira said it was answered a bit in the presentation, but also if you want to dig deeper into it, she's curious about how you balance due diligence with community capacity and burden in this application award process, if you have any further thoughts on that.
Definitely. So working with communities is a lot of work, right? And how we balance it is not ensuring that it remains their project, it remains their idea, it remains their initiatives with support from the fund. So we would still hold fiduciary management of the project, but it's guided by them. It is their project. So that is the best way I can explain of us facilitating community involvement, but also ensuring that our safeguards or our processes and policies are adhered to.
Thanks, Jose. This is the part of this session where you can raise your hands and come in as well. It doesn't have to be just in the chat. Any questions? Any takers? Karen, you made a point about the CBF investments. Oh, Angela, go ahead.
Hi. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you so much for a very interesting and highly relevant presentation. I'm curious about a few things. I'll start with one question, which is whether the Belize Fund is involved at all in project implementation, or if you're strictly a funding entity. And I'm wondering as well, in terms of, you've done an amazing job in terms of significantly increasing the area of protected space. I'm wondering if you could speak about how that space is managed, if the fund again has any involvement in that, or if it's strictly government or the partnerships. I'm just curious about how that works, and if there's been any negative impact perhaps on your economic pillars that depend on those resources. You mentioned at the beginning of your presentation how there's a heavy reliance economically on those resources. So if you could speak to those things, please. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So the first, let me see if I remember the three questions. The first one, we're not implementing, we are CTF. So we are like, we are a financer. So we are involved in conservation financing. We have a convening role in trying to bring players together, a strategic kind of oversight role in seeing how we can help steer and guide change. So there's no direct implementation on our end as a fund, and we want to be very clear on that. Our job is to support work on the ground. And in terms of managing the space that we're talking about, so we work through all our partners, through our grantees, through the government, and they're the ones that are doing the work on the ground. So the expansion of our marine protected areas to 30%, that's led by the government working with stakeholders. We give that support to them in terms of finances and ensuring what they develop and submit to us is meeting the target that the government has set to do. But our role is really very important in giving that support and enabling that work on the ground. And one, in regards to how we're expanding these areas, it's been a challenge because, as I mentioned previously, in the design of the negotiations of the blue bonds itself and what the government was committing to achieve under these milestones, that was done, I would say, with very little stakeholder involvement there. So these were all agreed to through negotiations with TNC, with the government, with the funders. And when that was finalized, it was then brought to the country and to the people and saying, this is what we negotiated, this is what we're working towards. So there's been a varying level of pushback and challenges from stakeholders as the government has now worked to expand these areas. It just means that it requires more time, and it will require them building trust and relationships with stakeholders to really feel that they are being heard and being considered as they expand out these areas, right? I think in the last 5% were to hit, and some new targets the government set for 20% protection of our coral reefs as no takes. That's very challenging right now, and the government has had to be doing some more strategic engagements with like the fishing communities, even the sport fishing tourism sector, because in Belize sport fishing is a very big industry, and it's catch and release. And if we're talking strictly no-take areas, they would not be allowed to go into those areas. So they could be potentially displaced also. So those are some of the current challenges that the government is working through there. But the fund itself does not directly become engaged in those. We are consulted, yes, in terms of our feedback and the approaches and any insights that we may gather from our grantees.
Thanks, Angela. Angela had a follow-up question about how big is the staff at Belize Fund?
There are 10 of us currently. So a fairly small team.
Any more pressing questions? I have a question on the topic of community. For this more for Jose. What signals to you that a community group is grant ready? Like, how do you avoid excluding promising but other resource groups? And a follow-up question on that is, what in your experience so far, I know you said you're 4 years young, has been the most effective capacity building intervention you all have done to date in terms of, is it proposal support? Is it the financial training? Is it the mentoring? What do you feel has been most impactful?
Right. So, as it relates to the first question, I think for me, what I see most and being able to judge interest is their ability to apply and reach out to us. We try to be there, but we cannot spoon feed them. So we go there, we talk about the fund, we let them know who we are, what we do, and the opportunities there, and then they liaise with us on what they want to do. That's the first step, right? And that's how we gauge that the community is ready. We don't want, and this has always been my point, we should not be going in there and telling them what they need to do. It has to come from them. It has to show interest at that level. So one of the key things that we do not do is provide them with proposal writing support at the concept level. We let them write their ideas. We let them put the interest in showing that they want to come to us, that they want something. And after that has been done, after they have shown their interest, then comes the next question that you ask, right? What I see that is very meaningful and impactful as well. It boils down to all of them providing the capacity building for proposal development. They like that because it allows them to understand more how a fund works. What are the processes? You hear them because of the proposal writing support that we provide them, that they don't understand the process. Sometimes they don't understand the language, but having somebody helping them write it, having somebody be there with them to help them understand that means a lot. Additionally, the support provided to them, the financial support in managing their grant counts a lot too, because they then understand that it's not just getting the money and using it, but it's also providing a report, not just financial report, but also being able to show progress of what has changed and where they want to go with that change too. So those have been the two main areas that as engaging with communities that I would want to point out to answer your question.
Thanks so much. That was a beautiful answer. We have 15 minutes, guys. Anybody wants to come in? I know Bahamas. Oh, Angela, yes.
Yes, thank you again, Jabal. Just wanting to go back to the very beginning and the design of the fund. That's 180 million that is set aside for achieving the marine conservation targets. I'm just wondering how that figure was derived, if it is that you went through, I know you talked about the stakeholder engagements to come up with those milestones. So is it that you went through a detailed costing of what it would take to be able to implement those milestones over time? Because I'm imagining that would have been a fairly difficult exercise to come up with some kind of, realistic figure. And I'm wondering if you, based on your experience to date, if you think that the level of funding is sufficient, if you might need to exceed that, and if you do you have the flexibility to look at other fundraising options beyond the initial blue bond that would have funded your operations?
Okay, well, thank you for that question, Angela. As to how they came up with the funding flows, I couldn't speak to that. That's the process. The government negotiating with TNC. I think it is tied to savings realized from the debt swap. I think there was about 200 and something million in savings, and it's from that savings, I guess the government agreed to put a portion into conservation, right? And that's how they came up with an initial 80 million. So 80 million are the sinking funds that we are receiving over the 20-year period. And then the 23.5 million to establish the endowment, with it expected to grow to 90 million, which would then transfer after 20 years, right? So that's how we came up to that's how they came up with the 180. Is it enough? Certainly not. We're just speaking about 4 million US annually. And through a current exercise. So step back a little bit. Was there any cost analysis done at that point? No. So these figures, I think, are coming largely off the savings realized. Since then, the country has engaged WWF, World Wildlife Fund, in a project finance for permanence program which they're working to finalize. I think the target is mid this year. And that whole program is to help the country establish long-term financing and support for its marine and coastal protected areas. And through that initiative, the government has worked to cost what it takes to manage 32 or 34 protected areas that we have, right, on an annual basis. So that process has a lot of quantitative information there, and I think annually it's about like 8 million US that's expected to be needed to manage the entire system. So we currently have 4. There's a whole 4 million, at least a 4 million gap, if not more. And as I mentioned earlier, we are a key partner in this Project Finance Permanence initiative, where the funding that we have is mobilized towards that, but also that we are looking to see how we can forge partnerships like through the PFP and other donors or fundraising opportunities to mobilize additional funds. So as a CTF, the Belize Fund isn't just locked into the blue bonds. That is its stable source, but the fund can also and will and is working on mobilizing additional funding to complement the gaps or help try fill some of the key gaps that are there. And I just want to add one very important gap identified for the country, for its managing its protected spaces, managing its blue spaces, is core support. We're talking about salaries, fuel for logistics, so the non-sexy things that donors don't want to fund, because donors only like innovative, well, mostly like innovative approaches, new ideas, technology, and those are great, but the needs, and we've been hearing it from our co-managers across the board, the needs on the ground are your core costs, and someone has to fund those core costs. So the fund has prioritized that core costs will be one of the important areas that we can help address.
Andrew, before you follow up, I saw Karen had her hand up. Karen, do you want to come in?
Hi, everyone. Karen McDonald-Gale from the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund. I think Leandra hit the points I was going to make, which is really the idea of the conservation trust funds as facilitators and catalysts. That we are there to help to figure out how best we can work in any of the countries we are working in. And I think the Belize Fund is a prime example. For CBF, we work with a range of conservation trust funds. And I saw a question on size, for example. Some of the staff in the National Conservation Trust Funds that we work with are as small as 2 and 3. But it is a little about the role. How can we help with the funding we now have? And the other point that you made that was good is that that's just a start. How do we make sure that we can facilitate national development by helping to create opportunities for more funding? That was it. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. Angela, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Javal. Just a related question on sustainability, not just of the fund, but of the impact that it would have had. I'm just wondering what happens at the end of the 20 years. Is it that the fund is to legally wind up? And then what happens to the the sustainability of the different projects? You've mentioned, I think, 30 to date that you would have implemented. Are there any plans to ensure that?
So thanks again, Angela. So as I had mentioned, and then Corinne just touched on it, CTFs are institutions that have longevity, right? So and the design coming from the blue bonds is one that creates a sustained financing infrastructure. So when the sinking fund ends in 2041, at the end of 20 years, that flow of funding ends, but then the endowment funds kick in, and the endowment funds continue to give that basic maintenance a level of maintenance of funding where we were. But in addition to that, over the period of time, the fund will be working towards mobilizing additional funds, whether it's through other initiatives like the PFP, partnerships with the government for other sustainable financing mechanisms, like the countries exploring blue carbon. The fund has started looking at outcome-based types of funding, working with development banks and other partners. And there are other areas in terms of fees and mechanisms that the fund, as a CTF, like all CTFs, will be exploring to see how we can continue to support the country. So this mechanism is a financing mechanism in perpetuity to support national development.
Thanks, Leandra. A follow-up on my end. I feel like you all alluded to, I think that the government sees you all as an important stakeholder and trusts you all. The communities themselves on the ground seem to really rely on you all and believe in you all. How long it took to like build that trust? And was it smooth from the get-go? Oh,
It's a good question, and I don't think we have the answer. So it's a work in progress. I don't know that we're fully trusted yet, fully seen as separate from government. So we're working to overcome that. We have a campaign right now, really educating the public on CTFs and who we are and how that works. I think in the first few years, there was a lot of intermingling of who the fund was with government, and we were often chastised by stakeholders as the government. And so we've worked a lot to improve that. I think it has improved a lot, and we're still working to strengthen that. But I think on the side of stakeholders, more and more now, and Josue could add to this, they're seeing the fund clearly as a national entity that partners with government, non-government groups, that we're transparent, that we're accountable, because a lot of information they can get right off our webpage. It's not necessarily true for other government entities, right? So I think we're beginning at the fourth year now to overcome that hurdle of natural distrust by the public for the government. And all we can do is to continue remaining engaged and transparent with our stakeholders.
Just to add to that too, one of the key changes, or one of the things that it was very noticeable while joining the Belize Fund, is that we try not to build relationships based on projects, but we try build it on partnerships, long lasting. It's so a partner is not somebody who would engage just in the lifetime of the project, but it's more than just that. And we always try to tell partners, it's not you against us. It's not us telling you how to do your job. It's both of us working together, because when you succeed, we succeed. And when we succeed, they succeed as well. So that was very key, and it was very notable from when we start. And that's how we engage them. That's how we keep them involved in what we do. But as Dr. Ricketts says, it's still a work in progress.
thanks so much. Karen, I see you had your hand up. We have 2 more minutes, so please feel free to come in.
So, okay, just a quick comment to agree, and maybe it's to give the other side of the coin. Being CTFs is a very, very interesting position, because we also have the government saying, you have funding for environment. Why shouldn't you be using it in the way I need you to use it for? So there's this very interesting place we hold, and that term of being a catalyst and a facilitator and a liaison has been interesting. And that's across the Caribbean region in the work we've been doing. And I'm learning more from Pacific Islands, the same kind of idea of how do we balance serving national development as an independent entity, with government playing their role, and really creating the role for conservation trust funds as these catalysts and facilitators.
Thanks so much, Karen. And yeah, I agree. It's a fine balancing line, but I guess having forums like this help in terms of ventilating these issues. And with that, I'm sorry, but we have to wrap up. Um, Thank you all for your attention, for participating. This call has been recorded. We'll send out the recording as well as the slides. I should do that by tomorrow, maybe. And our next one, we have one more planned in this quarter. It will be on March 18th. I will send out the invitation for that. It's on political commitment to durable action, so right on topic in terms of how we ended off here. So that session will facilitate a dialogue on how regional initiatives and SIDS that sustain political leadership, mobilize partnerships, and deliver long-term impact, and the role that conservation trust funds play in anchoring those efforts. So we'll have panelists from the Micronesia Conservation Trust Fund, Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, SPC. So I'm looking forward to that one. It will be at 10 o'clock in EST Eastern Time, so it's more catered towards the Pacific audience, which will be around mid-afternoon their time, and also in the East, it'll be their morning time. But we hope you can join. Thank you for joining this one. And that was great. Thank you, Leandra. Thank you, Josue. That was excellent. And we look forward to continuing the momentum. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye.
Bye.